People who just support the idea of representative government, who don't want their country to be run by a dictator, right? And they fight for 3 years basically. And this war is seen as a precursor to World War II because it is fascism is the first fascist country in Europe is, does anybody know the first fascist leader in Europe? It's not Hitler. It's in Italy. Mussolini, Il Duce, Mussolini. Right? He kind of looks like he's got that. In the early 20s, he initiates a fascist government in Italy. Then Hitler comes about a decade later. And then this guy Franco wants to take over Spain. Mussolini, Hitler's basically beginning to build up the military of Germany, beginning to have aspirations for conquering other parts of Europe. And the other countries in Europe that are powerful enough, influential enough to stop him, don't. Right? They don't, because a lot of it's because of World War I. They remember there's still a memory of how many people died and how tough World War I was, and not wanting to have any conflict. So it's like appeasement, right? You think, okay, I'll give in to this person. If he wants to do this, okay. If you want to make your navy bigger, okay. Oh, you want to occupy this little piece of territory near Germany, okay. Just as long as we don't have to fight a war again, because that was, pretty devastating. And Spain's an example of that. Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, these guys are going to be pouring weapons into Spain, pouring troops into Spain to try to influence the outcome of this war. If you look at the civil war in Syria, right? How many different factions are ISIS and Al Qaeda and Iran, and we're bombing over there now, and Russia, right? All these different factions. But the people in Spain who are defending representative government aren't getting any help, right? The United States isn't helping. The governments of France and England aren't helping. France is right there, right? It's help coming from France or England towards these folks who are fighting for representative government, right? These two here. Does anyone know who this guy is with the dog? He fought in Spain. Even though governments are not going to support they're called loyalists, defending the republic, right? They're loyal to the Republican government that was overthrown. There are people from all over the world, even though governments aren't going to support these folks necessarily, individual citizens from all over the world are going to go to Spain and fight. Men and women from Mexico, from the United States, and this guy's from England. Does anybody, he shouldn't look familiar. Has anyone ever read a book called 1984? George Orwell, Animal Farm. You guys know Who knows Animal Farm? Never. Who went to high school? You read Animal Farm, right? Animal Farm. Animal Farm. You guys don't know George Orwell? Big Brother. Yeah. He wrote. Did you write a book called Big Brother? He wrote.
I read the book.
Yeah. So he wrote 1984. He wrote Animal Farm. He wrote a book about his experience in Spain. It's called Homage to Catalonia. Where is it? Right here. Here it is. It's a really good book. Anyways, you don't know? Does anybody know? See this guy with the glasses? See this head right here? See that? It's a reporter. He's reporting in Spain. Does anybody know who that is? Has anyone ever heard of Ernest Hemingway? Ernest Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea. That's Ernest Hemingway. That's George Orwell. Right? Lots of people from all over the world went to. There was a group of Americans. They were called the Lincoln's Battalion. They went and fought in this country. This is one of the war. Actually, if you're talking about women in war, this is in Spain. Is a top. But there's a very large representation of women in combat too. In the photo. If you look at pictures of this war, this is in Barcelona. This is a 17-year-old girl guarding this rooftop in Barcelona. Right? Very ragtag collection of people. Very they're not getting, because while Franco is getting weapons provided by Hitler, provided by Mussolini, right, these guys aren't getting as much aid, so they're gonna end up losing after 3 years, right? And Spain does not enter World War II; it remains neutral. But this was this was a major opportunity where fascism was continuing to spread in Europe, could have been stopped, where Hitler and Mussolini and these fascist governments were willfully just pouring weapons and aid into this country, and really saw no response from France or England, and definitely not the United States, right? But it's a very, does anyone ever heard of this, the Spanish Civil War? It's really interesting. It sounds, like something, it sounds real, I don't know, Spanish Civil War. Don't confuse this with the Spanish-American War, Spanish Civil War, right? So, there were Americans in this war. There are Americans right now in Syria. You guys know that? There's this article in Rolling Stone about these folks, these guys. These are just regular guys. They're not like, it's not like the United States military doesn't send them over there, right? They've gone over to fight with the Free Syrian Army or something. So stuff like that. People were drawn to this conflict in Spain like that, right? They weren't sent by the United States military. They just sort of went over there. In many instances, they were, yeah. Some of them are actually buried. There are certain memorials for them at Arlington National Cemetery now. But so Spanish Civil War. It's really interesting. It's a really interesting conflict. But Franco's going to take over Spain. Spain's going to become a fascist country. Let's see. Here we go. In 1938, with this war still going on, there's what's called the Munich Agreement, where basically you have England, France, Germany, all these countries get together. Hitler has begun to build up the military of Germany in violation of the Treaty of Versailles, the treaty that ends World War I. He wants to annex a part of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland. There are Germanic, what you might call Germanic people who speak German all over Europe, right? They're like the Jews are in Russia and Germany. There's people like in Austria, Austrians speak German. Different parts of different countries where German spoken. There's this part of Czechoslovakia where they speak German, and Hitler was like, "Well, I want to annex it. Just want to take it because they speak German." There's other reasons too, geopolitical stuff. But basically, rather than France and England and these other leaders of these other countries basically allow him to do this sort of stuff. Allow him to go out of Germany's borders into other countries and take. Who remembers when Russia, was it the Crimea? Is it in Ukraine? Right? Russia invades Ukraine, right? In the last few, do you guys remember this when Russia invaded Ukraine? There's this area of the Ukraine called Crimea, which is like they're ethnically Russian or the Russian-speaking people. They have close ties to Russia. And so Vladimir Putin just invaded and sort of occupied this area. Do you remember this in the last few years? Do you remember? No? Or South Ossetia in Georgia? Stuff like that. Okay. So anyways, so Hitler wants to basically expand outside of Germany's borders, occupy different territories. He's building up his military in violation of Treaty of Versailles. He wants to expand. And the Prime Minister of England, who is not Winston Churchill, is a guy named Neville Chamberlain, is going to agree to this, allow it. And they're going to walk away from this agreement where they allow Hitler to do all this stuff. And the Prime Minister of England is going to say this agreement is peace in our time. The idea that, okay, we're not going to war. He's going to do these few little things over here he's not supposed to do, but that's okay because we're not going to have to go to war again, like World War I, right? This idea of peace. Because remember that some of these battles in World War I lasted for months, and they were stalemates, and hundreds of thousands of people died, right? In these, so basically, there is a situation where France and Germany are not really standing, for lack of a better term, standing up to Hitler's aggression, expansionism, militarism, and to the east of Germany, the Soviet Union, which is run by Joseph Stalin, does not have a good relationship with France and Germany, and sees France and Germany giving in to Hitler, and is worried that they are not going to be there to assist if there's some sort of hostility, because the Soviet Union is a communist country. Germany is a fascist country at the time, right? The Nazis are a fascist, white supremacist, anti-Semitic government. The Soviet Union is a communist government. It's also very oppressive and very anti-Semitic, but from a political standpoint, fascism is usually viewed as being the very, very, very far right wing or left wing? Right wing, right? It's very far right. You'll hear this word being used lately during our last election with our current president. You'll hear things like white nationalist, right? the whole idea of like white nationalism, like the Ku Klux Klan, the American Nazi Party, these sort of radical fringe hate groups or white supremacist groups possibly supporting the president. And communism is the very radical like left wing of the political spectrum. Fascism is the very radical right. These are two groups that would normally hate each other. They don't like each other, right? But Stalin is so worried that Hitler might go to war with him, or they might have to go to war with Germany, and they won't get any help from France or England, and definitely not the United States, way across the ocean, that they sign, there is a agreement between the Soviet Union and Germany. It's called the Molotov, like the cocktail, just kidding, Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, or usually it's commonly referred to as the Nazi-Soviet or German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. This is not an alliance. This is not a military alliance. This is not a treaty. It is a non-aggression. It is basically a pledge that they won't attack each other. Military alliance is, okay, so Ariana and I have a military alliance. If you attack Ariana, then I have to attack you, right? It's like a biker club at a bar. No, I'm just kidding. This is just non-aggression. So if Germany is attacked, when Germany is attacked by whoever, Russia doesn't have to come to their defense. They just have to agree not to attack Germany also, right? And so they signed this agreement in August of 1939, and a month later, they invade Poland. They do not invade Poland together. This is not a coordinated invasion. Russia invades Poland from the east. Germany invades Poland from the west. A lot of people don't know this. A lot of people cite Germany's invading Poland. They don't realize that Russia invaded Poland. And Russia did some pretty brutal stuff in Poland also, So they invade, and then when they meet in the middle of Poland somewhere, it's at some bridge. It's kind of a weird situation because they're not an alliance. They're not like, yeah, we conquered this place together. They're just sort of like, okay, we're on this side, you're on that side. It's strange. But this is so Hitler had occupied Austria. So he had expanded the military in Germany beyond the size it should have been. He had moved into parts of Germany on the border with France that he wasn't supposed to. He occupies parts of Czechoslovakia. He occupies Austria. The invasion of Poland is what finally gets England and France to declare war on Germany. They have some sort of alliance or mutual agreement with Poland, basically. And at this point, the League of Nations, that whole League of Nations thing that Wilson had talked about, that it did exist, is completely fallen apart. It's not very effective, right? Are you feeling irie? Okay. So Germany invades Poland, 1939, and this is what gets France and England to declare war. Now that Hitler is not concerned about Russia, right? The Soviet Union's over there. That's where a lot of the bulk of the fighting was in World War I for Germany. It's where the bulk of the fighting later on is going to be for this war. But right now, Hitler does not have to worry about Russia. There's no Eastern Front. He can just focus. He invades Poland, and then he starts to go after England and France. He invades France through Belgium. It takes about 2 months for France to surrender. Evacuation. England is not going to. There's going to be no land invasion of England, right? It's a little island. It's Wales, Scotland, and England. It's that island. You guys know England? We already talked about the Beatles and haggis, right? The Beatles aren't. They're there technically. I think they were all like 2 years old. You know what I'm saying? But England is going to be hit substantially, repeatedly in airstrikes by the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, basically, German air power. They are going to bomb London. The entire government, Parliament, Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister, is going to be run basically underground. There's going to be an entire elaborate underground system of tunnels and stuff and offices where the entire government and military are going to function. Because there's, but this is before really there's unmanned aircraft that can pinpoint target, like, oh, there's a school or there's a wedding that an Al-Qaeda guy's at. Have you seen the footage, right? Have you seen footage of like these really precise bombing missions and stuff? Smart bombs, the idea of smart bombs.
It's called JDAMs.
Huh?
It's called JDAMs. They're not smart
Oh,
bombs.
are they super smart? Yeah, they didn't have this stuff back then. They didn't have computer technology built into the explosive stuff we were launching at people, right? So if planes started flying over to attack you, you turned all the lights in the city off. like right here. It was called an air raid. It was an air raid drill. All the lights were turned off. He went completely dark. That way, because they had human beings on these planes were spotting where they were supposed to hit. A good example, like in London, you have St. Paul's Cathedral, giant dome, right? Giant dome, and where it's this big church, Church of England. Lots of different important people are buried there. Darwin's buried there, and Isaac Newton. But it's this humongous dome, and it was used actually by German pilots as a spot to figure out where they were in London and bomb stuff, right? They're trying to take out factories that are building weapons, or they're trying to take out, all sorts of stuff for the war effort, military bases. Massive bombing campaign, but no invasion of England, no land invasion of England. England does not surrender. It is very devastated from this, but it doesn't have to deal with a land invasion. Never surrenders. It hangs on in this war, right? Through 1939, through 1940, and then in 1941, he has conquered France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Poland, Denmark, and Holland. I got a late. Yeah. I got a late. That's when I get a cupcake after this.
That's when, like, a couple years later, D-Day happened.
Later after this. So that's 1944. In 1941, with all those countries occupied by Germany, and with England basically is stuck in England. England has no intention of coming back to the mainland continent of Europe and fighting Germany, right? They're just over on that island of theirs. Hitler says, you know what? I bombed the hell out of them, and they were very weak. France is done. The U.S. is not getting involved in this war anytime soon. I'm going to turn around and invade Russia. You know what I'm saying? He basically wanted to invade Russia. He wanted, the Russians. A lot of Russians are what you call Slavic people. Slavic. The word slave comes from this term Slavic. There's this sort of going back centuries, this attitude, and Hitler sort of used a lot of this language. The idea of Russian peasants being like the slaves of Germany, and all of this land you could grow wheat and agricultural products on in the Ukraine and parts of Russia, and using all this land to grow food for the German people, and making the Russians our slaves, and all this stuff, right? So he turns around and invades Russia in May. It's called Operation Barbarossa. I like saying that. Barbarossa.
You pushed them pretty far back.
Yeah. June of 1941. May, June 1941. Operation Barbarossa. Operation Barbarossa, not to be confused with Barbarella, the Jane Fonda movie. Totally different thing. Nobody gets that reference. Nobody knows Jane Fonda. Man. I gotta come up with like Bieber jokes or something. Bieber, or I don't even know what you guys. Selena Gomez. I don't even know who these people are. There's like celebrities, reality shows, and I'm like, I don't even know who these celebrities are. I don't know who these people are. I'm trying to watch Survivor. I'm just like, I don't get this. What are these people doing? Like, well, they're on an island and they're bickering and they're like, and they got like tiki torches at the end. What is this? What is this? Survivor. Go look at that. That's Survivor right there. Stalingrad. Boom. So the Germans invade. And the Germans, when they invade a country, it's the word they use to describe it at the time, and then historians use it. It's called blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg, basically very, very fast. Like the tanks moving very fast, infantry moving very fast, surprise, like just moving very quickly, right? This is still really a world. I think is the I or the I might have messed up the I in either. This is still a world that sort of hasn't really developed tactics in modern warfare, right? World War I was fought very much in an old school way, right? We just line up and we go at each other. Even if you're digging trenches, you're still lining up, right? So this modern warfare is sort of still being developed, and so Germany's going into these countries and really handling a lot of these countries. In Russia, has anyone ever seen Russia on a map? Is it small or is it big? It's humongous. It's very large. Has Russia been invaded? Hitler invades Russia. Had Russia been invaded before? Nope. By Napoleon. Oh, Napoleon. How did it work out for Napoleon? Not very well, right? Who's seen The Princess Bride? Has anyone seen The Princess Bride? Am my 80s references just gonna go out the window right now? The guy who hits a movie where the guy's, okay, then that joke doesn't even work. Never start a land war in Asia. Never start a land war in Asia. Afghanistan, right? You know how many countries the Russians invade Afghanistan. The British have invaded Afghanistan. We have invaded Afghanistan. It's not a very easy place to. It's mountainous. There's not a lot of cities. It's very complicated. You know, Russia's huge. Plus, Germany invades thinking it's May, it's June, summer's about to start. We're gonna go in there, move through. We're gonna push through Ukraine, get into Russia. We're gonna occupy Moscow. Boom. By the time September rolls around, we're gonna occupy this country, and these people are gonna be our slaves, right? If it doesn't happen, they get stopped. They get slowed down by the Russians. They didn't think the Russians were going to put up a fight at all.
Yeah, they just kept sending millions and millions.
Yeah, the Soviet Union is going to lose 20 million people. 20 million, actually, probably more. Civilians, soldiers, right? I mean, you have just. They're going to put up a stiff resistance to this, much more substantial than Germany anticipated, to the point that all of a sudden it's winter in 1941, in 1942. There was no preparation. Does anyone? I mean, I've never been to Russia. Has anyone been to Russia? Has anyone ever seen Dr. Zhivago? It's like you watch a movie, and it's a movie about Russia. It makes me cold, just watching it. Like you listen. Has anyone ever listened to the Nutcracker, Tchaikovsky? Just listening to Tchaikovsky makes me put a coat on. It's cold. It's very cold. It's very. Okay, thank you. Right? It's very cold. The Mongols invade Russia. Even the Mongols don't occupy all of Russia. They come to one specific part of Russia, very far south.
It snows a lot there.
It snows a lot. So the German, I tried to find a picture of it because I've heard about this German infantry in cities like Stalingrad or Leningrad with like ladies' coats on, like different. They would just grab anything to stay warm, right? Eating. I mean, who knows what they were eating? Stray dogs, horses. I mean, and Russians are used to that. There are stories hundreds of years ago. Russians would, they would run out of food. It's so cold. They'd start eating whatever, livestock, pets. They would just sort of work their way down because it's really tough winters, right? So basically, this invasion is going to go sour for Germany. They're eventually going to be repelled. Basically, the turning point where they start to retreat from Germany, they no longer gain any ground, happens in January of 1943 in Stalingrad. It wasn't always called Stalingrad. Joseph Stalin, the dictator of Russia, named a city after himself. Because, like I said, he's an asshole. So that's the reason that the German troops are there. It has no strategic value whatsoever. But because it's named after the dictator, they're like, we'll take this city. And this fighting goes on for months and months and months. And hundreds of thousands of people die, right? These cities are leveled. If you look at pictures of Tokyo in Japan, Dresden, Germany, right? In France, if you look at pictures of Berlin, let me skip ahead. This is in 1948. This is 3 years after the war ends, and this is Berlin. See that? That's how devastated these countries are. If you want to see what Italy looked like, there's a movie that was made in 1949, 4 years after the war ends. It's called The Bicycle Thief. It's about a father and a son, and the dad's bike is stolen in Rome. But the whole movie is just scenery of what Italy looks like in 1949, and it's very similar. A lot of poverty, very devastated. So, if you wanted, I don't know how much you guys watch the news. If you wanted some sort of mental picture of what the situation is probably like in a good amount of Syria, right? They've been fighting a civil war in Syria since 2011, and it does not look like there's any real end to it. Eventually that this becomes. There's millions of people that have been displaced, that have left. There's people that are there, they're stuck. You can imagine that there's certain cities that they've battled over back and forth 3-4 times. Foreign countries, Russia, the United States, have started bombing places. It messes places up, right? It's very devastating. The United States has been extremely fortunate, with the exception of, obviously, with native Indian nations, parts of the United States that were Mexico, if you were Mexican, and then the Confederacy, the South, right? The South was invaded and occupied. But other than that, I mean, in the last 150 years, the United States hasn't really had to deal with that a lot. Like September 11th is something like that is devastating, but it's one attack. The important thing to know, June of 1941, Germany invades Russia. So now Russia is at war with Germany. Russia is going to, the bulk of the German army is going to be on the Eastern Front fighting Russia. At least 2/3 of their army, so I've heard 90%, right? The bulk of their casualties, German casualties. Russia is going to turn Germany around and then is going to proceed to invade the rest of Europe, pushing Germany back and occupy Eastern Europe. And for 3 years, right? For 3 years, England is not there. The United States is not in Europe until they invade France in 1944. So for 3 years, it's really Russia fighting Germany. They're getting lots of aid from the United States. There's lots of what's called Lend-Lease aid from the United States. But they're the ones fighting Germany alone. This is something that was not really, if you were alive during the Cold War, wasn't really just in the history books a lot. There was not, in the 25 years in your lifetime, who's 25 or younger? Who's 25 or younger? Who needs me to buy them alcohol later? Be honest. I will. I'm just kidding. Don't do drugs. And don't drink. No, I'm serious. Who needs to be? It's been over. Was ended before a lot of you were born. Prior to that, though, was the us and versus them and the Soviet Union, and so they weren't given a lot of what you might say credit for the amount of effort they put into fighting Germany. Having said that, they did invade Poland with Germany, right? They weren't necessarily. It wasn't like they started fighting Germany because Germany attacked them. But they were totally willing to invade Poland with Germany. It wasn't like, so. But there's a substantial number of Russians that died. 400,000 Americans. 400,000 Americans at the end of this war, mostly soldiers, are dead. 20 million Russians. 20 million people. Probably more. Actually, the author, Foner, our textbook says very likely more. And when it comes to death body counts, for lack of a better term, the textbook is very conservative. The author for History 17A and 17B, very conservative. Usually, I don't know why, but eventually the Russians are going to push Germany back and start invading the rest of Europe. The Russians are the first ones to get to the camps, concentration camps, primarily because Poland is in Eastern Europe and a lot of the camps are in Poland. Right, they're going to liberate the first camp. But the United States eventually is attacked at Pearl Harbor. They declare war on Japan. Germany declares war on the United States, and then they slowly start to build up the military mobilized for war. In 1942, this is the Allies, the United States, the British. They invade North Africa, right, and then cross the Mediterranean and invade Sicily. But really, the big invasion is on June 6th, 1944. This is D-Day. D-Day, the invasion of France at a beach called Normandy. This series of beaches called Normandy. It's this coast, basically this small little stretch of coast where they cross the English Channel, right? You have thousands and thousands and thousands of troops built up in England. We're talking about, naval vessels, troops, planes. There are gliders that are going to go, and they're going to have gliders go into France. People are going to parachute into France, right behind enemy lines. 82nd Airborne, correct? Yeah, 82nd Airborne. That's John Wayne is in charge of the 82nd in the movie. It's pretty. I mean, I'm not a John Wayne fan, but it's still pretty cool. I know a guy. I know somebody who went in on June. He's dead now, but June 12th, so a few days after that. But he got. Medal of Honor winner, was shot several times. He actually went back to France 20 years later, and there was a D-Day museum where he was listed as one of the people that died in the invasion, and he was like, oh, I'm right here. I made it. Yeah. So this invasion is going to be it's a very small stretch of beach, right? They give the stretch of beach, they divide it up into different beaches and give them various names: Sword, Juno, Gold, Utah, and Omaha. And Omaha Beach is the one. If anyone's seen Saving Private Ryan, that's the one beach that was extremely difficult to get through. A lot of casualties. Have you seen footage? Have you guys seen that movie or seen? I'm not gonna show. I don't want to show the clip because it's really. Yeah, it's with Tom Sizemore. Let me. He did a lot of drugs. He was a crackhead, yeah. Wait, D-Day.
What about Band of Brothers?
Oh, let's not. Whoa. You've seen this like these things, right? These carriers, they would basically all pile into these. This thing comes down, and they're like still like 3 feet of water in front of them. They jump in the water. There are machine guns set up, mortars. It's very, very, extremely dangerous. Extremely, I don't know. And they couldn't just roll up on the beaches because they built these sort of like, they put in these metal pieces to prevent, tanks and stuff from rolling up. It's really scary. It's just, I can't even imagine it. It's just terrifying to me. And then you can imagine the amount of people packed into boats like this, getting seasick, nervous, all sorts of stuff, right? There's bodies floating in the water. There were people who had to come in before this and clear landmines, all sorts of stuff. Real pictures, this is good, yeah. Yeah, like this stuff. See, they put these in here.
Oh, yeah,
And sand gets everywhere. You guys have been to the beach. Sand gets everywhere. You're in Paris a month later, and just like, God, I still got sand from the Omaha in my ear. Okay, I'm just trying to make humor. Anyways, where was I? Where was it? Okay. Wait. Oh no, here we go. So, eventually, though this invasion is successful and the Allies push into France, by August of 1944, 2 months later, right, they have occupied Paris, right? So, similar to what happened, the Japanese, in a very rapid, aggressive way, start invading British colonies, French colonies, attack the United States, and very quickly, in succession, occupy a lot of places. But over time, they sort of maybe you could say spread themselves too thin, or there's the countries that line up against them and start to mobilize become too substantial for them to resist. Same thing happens to Germany. They go into Russia, it proves to be catastrophic, and then the United States gets involved and throws hundreds of thousands of troops across the English Channel into France. So you have the Russians coming in from the east, the United States and the British. Canadians, French, all these folks coming in from the west, and Germany has been fighting at this point for 5-6 years now, right? They're
like sandwich, right?
Yeah, very tired. And in World War I, this is a similar scenario, but there was a revolution in Russia, and Russia had signed a separate peace treaty, had gotten out of the war, right? So Germany, but in this war that does not happen, and eventually both countries meet in Germany, and the yawn. Oh.